Recording has started. Hello everyone. Welcome to another Open Cluster Management Community meetings. Today we're very pleased to have Jaya to present us the Kubernetes Policy Management White Paper. So whenever you're ready, Jaya, please take it away.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here and share the work we are doing in the policy work group. I'm going to share my screen.
Hey folks, it's Jim.
Oh, you're here. Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, there was some software downloads that needed to complete.
As usual, right?
Yeah,
So maybe, Jim, why don't you start off introducing yourself and then you can share the screen and present your piece, and then I will take over and present the second part. Okay?
absolutely. Um, yep, let me turn on my camera and I'll share my screen as well. Okay. All right. Yeah, so thanks, Jaya. Thanks for inviting me. And just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Jim Bagwadia, co-founder and CEO at Nirmata. And what we're going to talk about today is some of the activities in the policy working group that Jaya is part of, and along with several other folks from not just Red Hat, IBM, but also others in the industry, right? So I'll just, and we can certainly share these slides. I think Jaya, you have the link, so feel free to send out to the team. But what we'll do is we can keep this interactive and just go through some of the activities and key projects in the group and give links to more details. So in the working group, and I joined this group about like I think a year and a half ago. There were a few different members, and the charter was defined at that time already. So here, if you go to the policy working group website, you'll see what the basic charter for the group is. When it comes to Kubernetes, of course, everybody talks about the complexity of Kubernetes, the configuration management challenges, and it's all about making it easy to configure, manage Kubernetes, and of course, using policies to do that, right? So how do you define or use policies as this, contract or a handoff between developers and operators? How do you set, and there's built-in policies in Kubernetes, like of course, pod security policies, network policies, others. There's also, like policies that can be managed as CRDs, like through Kyverno, and there's policies that can be managed even with native, or DSL type languages, like with OPA Rego, through Gatekeeper, as well as other upcoming projects, right? So looking at all of these holistically and seeing what really is the right policy architecture for Kubernetes. How do we work with some of the other groups like SIG Security, SIG Auth, which manages some of the native policies like pod security. And even in the broader CNCF, where does this all fit to in terms of the direction for policy management, and how does it map into compliance, things like that, right? So that's the high level charter. And there's two active projects currently within the working group. And there were, I'll talk a little bit about some of the prior initiatives, which have at this point been archived, but certainly open to resurrecting some of those efforts based on, interest from the community and people who are want to either take those on and, do other things. And there's also plenty of things going on within these projects, which we, would welcome more contributors, more help on, right? But the two projects that we'll talk about today are there's a policy report CRD, and I'll go through that, and then Jaya is going to talk about the policy management white paper. So diving right into the CRD, and feel free, by the way, feel free to interrupt if there's any questions or put them on chat or whatever is convenient along the way, and we can either, based on time, take questions as they come up, or we can, also carve out some time later. So, like I mentioned, when I joined the working group, there were some initiatives which were already had been discussed, etc., obviously, and one of the early things that was talked about and which never really got off the ground to a full extent. There are some papers and documents and things out there which would be interesting to go back and look at if you're interested into this. But one of the things that was talked about is just like you have CSI, CNI, why not have, something for a policy interface, right? So why not have a plugin model where you can now bring different policy engines and they natively become part of Kubernetes, much like we have machinery in other areas, right? And that's certainly a valid idea, and I think there's still a lot of merit to that. The challenge became even agreeing to what exactly a policy is, where does it apply, what the scope it covers. And as we are trying to classify, and one of the things, Jaya will talk about as we're going through the white paper is policy is a very broad set of things, right? And it could mean different things to different folks. So it has become something which is fairly hard to standardize in terms of just saying, okay, or that we want like a plugin model where anybody can drop in a policy engine and there's some, conformance testing and things like we do with network or storage drivers, right? So I think some areas, like policy, and maybe if we break down policy into some of the different parts, perhaps it's possible. And certainly today, if you think about policy management in Kubernetes, admission control certainly comes up as one of the key areas, but other areas are also applicable. The other aspect was, we talked about, and there was some, effort to try and formalize um, policy languages itself, right? To say, but that again, turns out, there's a wide set of Kubernetes users. Different folks want different types of languages, or they don't want a language at all, which is what Kyverno offers. Is they go more, they are in tune with the Kubernetes mindset and the way of doing things, and they would prefer a native approach just through YAMLs, which also Gatekeeper tries to do through the constraint language, etc. Right? So that's where we kind of initially had some discussions around that, but then quickly realized, okay, if we cannot tackle all of this and we're not ready to, and maybe these weak items can be revisited at some point, what is something we can get done which would be useful to Kubernetes admins, operators, and users, and which everybody can kind of say, okay, that makes sense. We need to at least try and standardize that, right? So that's where, the one thing we started thinking about is that if you look at and this I'm just using, the reference architecture, which is used, this is more for like authorization and things like that. But in XACML, there's a well-defined sort of architecture for policies. What's interesting, is if you start mapping that to Kubernetes and look at how that might apply, you typically have systems which are talking through Kubernetes APIs to one or more clusters, right? So you'll have some central or external management system. You have the different controllers or operators running inside the cluster, which are acting as the decision point. They may be looking up the API server and other sources to complete the information or to make policies more data driven. There's a policy store which in most cases turns out to be some form of Kubernetes resources, like whether it's a config map or whether it's some other way of serializing or managing in like things like I guess if you're using Rego, you would somehow put Rego into a Kubernetes resource and map it into your policy engine. If you're using Kyverno, it's a native resource. If you're using something like kubeborden, maybe it's some compiled WASM, which is now stored as base64. So whatever that manner is, eventually it needs to end up in the cluster to execute, right? And the enforcement point, like I said, typically tends to be admission controls, but also some of these policy engines, like Kyverno again, which I'm most familiar with. It will do background scans and things like that. So it can periodically check for various and also use other triggers within the cluster. Of course, if you're doing runtime, enforcement and runtime things, that would be triggered based on runtime events, either through eBPF or, with Falco, it can even watch audit logs and things like that, right? So at a high level, that's what, if you kind of map the reference architecture to Kubernetes could look like. But then what was missing is this, okay, how do you get from this decision point how do I know what exactly happened and how do I feed that back to my external management systems? So the whole goal of the policy report CRD is to try and standardize to some degree that. And the idea is to not, have not kind of be too rigid in that standard, but make it so that it's flexible. You can do this either in a namespace or cluster-wide space. The goal is not to provide any controller or operator, but really the schema, the definition for what this CRD would look like, and focus only on the current state, right? So we're not looking to solve like history or anything like that in the cluster, but only what exactly is going on now. And the idea is it should work with all standard Kubernetes tools. It should be flexible enough where these external systems can pick up the policy reports and then enrich that or add more information to it. One item I forgot to add here is we've also through help from Anka and others at IBM, we've also built some mappings into OSCAL where there is room to have other tools which could take this report and translate it to some other standards, in particular to OSCAL definitions of what this would look like, right, for compliance and things like that. So anyways, at a very high level, that's what the policy report CRD focuses on. And where we are right now, we're, through the working group itself and through just outreach to other organizations. So Kyverno has native support for this and it's available in GA, right? So it's in Kyverno. Kubebench, we have already completed. Falco, there's the Falco community is is working with us to add this into the Falco sidekick. So that's in progress. Trivy is also something we're working with Aqua for image scanning, and that'll be in progress. And then there's some discussions on KubeBomber. I haven't listed Gatekeeper here, but we have had discussions. There were some concerns from the Gatekeeper team on whether policy reports as a Kubernetes resource would be scalable, but it may be something to revisit, and kind of reach out to them and show what the current state is and get more thoughts and inputs. So let me stop there. That was my last slide. I can do a very quick demo on my system, or in fact, just for in the sake of time, we can share some links also in terms of the policy report, and we can come back to the demo perhaps after Jaya's portion. Either way, I'm flexible on how we want to do this.
Yeah,
but any questions, thoughts?
Go
ahead,
yeah.
Jay.
No, I was just saying, if you want to do a demo in 2 minutes, go for it. Demos are always cool.
Yeah, so it shouldn't take too long. And what I will do, actually, let me, I'll start sharing in a second, but let me just make sure I have a cluster where we can do this. And
yeah, while you're doing that, Jim, I just want to add that the policy report adoption is also in progress in the Open Cluster Management project.
Okay.
We are representing CCX Insights as policy reports, and those will be integrated into our observability layer. So that's in progress right now.
Awesome.
And we are also looking at in our roadmap, also adopting this for the policy violations that come out of our hub component.
Okay.
So, and again, in that context, we are looking at some of the challenges you mentioned, which is how do we make this more scalable, right? Because if you just generate a bunch of policy report CRs, how do we, periodically archive them off into a data store? Because that will also lend itself easily for analytics and so on. So that is a design that we are working through. So maybe we can come back to this forum in a later stage and give an update on that.
Okay. I'm just checking. Why don't
you prep for your demo and maybe I can do my piece?
Yeah.
And Okay?
All right, that sounds good.
Okay. So you all should be able to see my screen, I think.
Yep.
Okay, so let me talk about so just to introduce myself, I'm the Chief Security and Governance Architect for the Open Cluster Management Community Project. So excited to be here to tag team with Jim and talk about policy work group activities. So one of the activities we kicked off in the last couple of months is this policy white paper, because we wanted to come up with a way to enable customers who are transforming from their traditional IT infrastructure to cloud, right? How do we guide them as they adopt cloud and ensure that the proper governance is in place so that they can meet external and internal standards? So we have various thoughts on that. So we wanted to represent that in this white paper so that it then becomes a best practice that customers can adopt. So, and we want to do this in an open collaborative way. Hence, the policy work group is definitely an excellent forum for us because it allows us to come up with a common view across multiple parties, and we are collaborating on this. And we want to outline the benefits of policy management and introduce the term policy-based governance when operating a cloud platform to external and internal standards. We want to define what the overall policy management architecture will look like, what are going to be all the various building technical blocks. Jim showed some of that in the XML architecture. We'll definitely derive some of our concepts from there. And then we also want to provide examples of open source upstream technologies that can be used, because when we talk about policy-based governance and helping customers meet internal and external standards, we're talking about aspects such as security, regulatory compliance, software engineering, resiliency, etc., right? So, and customers don't want to get tied into proprietary technologies. So we want to be able to give them examples on what open source upstream community technologies are available that they can incorporate to meet these goals. And we also want to show how to integrate this with existing enterprise systems and technologies. Because if you think about it, customers view cloud platform as just an extension of their existing IT infrastructure. So they already have existing policies and procedures. And in this sense, when I say policies, in this sense, I'm talking about policies that they've documented, whether it is NIST 853 based or their own internal policies, right? Enterprise policies. And then they want to map those to technical policies for the technical controls. And when they do that, they want to integrate with their existing tools for security operations center, incident management, etc. So we want to architect that as well. And at the end of the day, many of our enterprise customers have to meet compliance standards like PCI, HIPAA, etc. So we want to tie this out to how can this architecture help you meet those goals as well. So that's kind of the overall content we want to address in the white paper, right? And in terms of how the community can engage, join the policy work group. So I have the link here. We'll share this whole deck. We need to put it in a spot where we can open up access. We'll do that. I'll work with Jim on that. And so you can join the policy work group. It meets once in 2 weeks to contribute to the white paper. And then I'm going to walk you through the outline of the white paper itself, the link for which is attached here. So we are actually working on this in this as part of the policy work group. So this is the Git link for that. And so if you look at the outline of the white paper, right? So first of all, we want to provide, obviously, why are we doing this? I kind of outlined some of that earlier. And what is the target audience, right? So the target audience would be, folks like the architects who are architecting the how the cloud platform is getting operated. It will also be the SRE, the day-to-day folks who are managing the cloud environment. And obviously, from a security perspective, it will also be the security ops folks as well, right? So there are various target audiences here. And then we want to, in terms of scope of the policy, we are obviously focusing on technical policies. So this will include all the cluster components, various configurations, runtime behaviors, etc. And we also want to apply this across the entire end-to-end lifecycle. So it will be from development to deployment to runtime, right? So all those aspects. And you also want to expand the scope to cover as much of the software stack as possible. Though our focus obviously is going to be on the container layer, we will branch and focus on other aspects as well. And then from an architecture point of view, there are all these various technology blocks we need to think about. Jim already talked about the policy report CR for the reporting aspect. There is the enforcement aspect and the management aspects and stuff we'll talk about. And then the whole life cycle of the policy. How is it authored? How is it versioned? How is it deployed? So this is where GitOps comes into play. How is it enforced on the managed clusters? And then detecting violations, remediating, all the full life cycle of policies. And then, as I mentioned, the integration with external systems for incident management, compliance, security operations, et cetera. And then we will also highlight various use cases for which policy management can be applied to, including ensuring the configuration is in controlled state, in a desired state, ensuring operational compliance to internal and external standards, regulatory compliance, as well as when I say supply chain security, this is where, like I mentioned, we want to focus on development, deployment, and runtime. So the supply chain security is where the DevSecOps comes into play, right? So how do you incorporate policy management aspects there? So these are all the various things that we need to work on. So where are we in terms of content that we have produced to date? We are at a very early stage, right? So if you think about all the various aspects that we need to think about, what we have done is we have identified what are potential upstream technologies, what are the various configurations we need to worry about, what are the various aspects we need to think through. And obviously, the reason we are here in this open cluster management community is because from a multi-cluster point of view, we are obviously looking at this community as providing the technology for the multi-cluster aspects of policy management, right? So and then integrating with, like Jim mentioned about OSCAL, so all these compliance aspects we'll bring to the table as well. So there's a lot of work still to be done. I just wanted to come here along with Jim to kind of give a view of this is the work that we are doing. Our goal in terms of timeline is to get a draft of this paper done by hopefully in the next couple of months. And then we have also submitted a panel for KubeCon, so hoping to bring it there and open it up for discussions and so on. So that's kind of at a very high level where we are. So like I said, welcome contributions, welcome participation in the work group to help us put this together. Jim, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was a great overview. Certainly, there's links in the presentation itself, or if you just go to policy working group, like our page, you'll see different So feel free to join one of our meetings or just reach out on Slack if you have any questions or suggestions.
So let's see whether there are any questions from the audience.
I have a quick question. So the policy white paper discussion, is it mostly revolving around security, how we can enforce the security on the Kubernetes cluster, or can we expand the policy a little bit in terms of helping install applications as well?
Yeah, it's not just security, Mike. So we will definitely focus, like I said, on security, resiliency, software engineering aspects. So across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. So full operational. So that's where there's some very interesting intersections, and you're absolutely right. Policy is not just about that security, but could be also configuring tools, making sure the required workloads are running. So there could be some very interesting things there. In the Kyverno project, we're also having discussions. So with other tools like on the storage side, with the OpenEBS, with cert managers using Kyverno, same thing with Flux for policies, for GitOps to enforce multi-tenancy. So there's just so many different areas. We haven't done anything formal yet, but there's a lot of interest in using policies for service mesh as well to configure for fine-grained configuration, things like that, right? So could be a good areas to expand into. Okay, so just thank you. And certainly, if you have any other ideas or some other projects you want to kind of see that intersection with policy management, let us know. Yeah, so just to show, a sample of this policy report inside the cluster, and then I'll kind of point to actually a community developed tool for viewing this even graphically. So I have now a simple cluster running. This is my local, Docker desktop that I just brought up, and I installed Kyverno on it, as an example, but it could be any tool which supports this report. And I have an Nginx workload which is, which has some problems, right? So if I look at the policies I have all the standard pod security standard-based policies here, and they're all set to enforce mode. But since I already had workloads running in my cluster when I installed this, these are not, those workloads need to be scanned and reported, right? So to report the, if I do, just because this is all native, I can just do and policy report is abbreviated as POL-R. So if I do that, and if I do -A, I can see the namespace-based ones. So I see there's a cluster-wide one where there were 68 rules or different that were applied. 2 of them failed. And at a namespace level, 34 were applied. 1 of them failed, right? So now to see the details of the errors, I'm just going to go back to the docs, look for there's a shortcut here on how to kind of see this in the command line. And I'll, there's, like I mentioned, obviously for this would be something that could feed into Prometheus or some other tool in terms of actually reporting this or alerting. But now if I'm just grepping here for the failures and skipping the success, I see that I have these 2 failures. It's telling me exactly which workload, which rule failed, right, in terms of what the problem is. And both of the errors are the same. It's saying you're running, your container is not running as non-root, right? Now, if I want to look at this graphically within a single cluster, like I mentioned, in the community itself, there's a tool developed called Policy Reporter, which is pretty slick. It can take the standard policy report and it integrates with, Slack and Teams and all sorts of other tools upstream, even with Discord. And it shows everything in a graphical manner so you can see how many policies, what's running, what's failed. So it's a good dashboard to have if you're running locally. It can also output to Prometheus or Loki or other upstreams. And of course, even different policy tools may have this as well. So there's lots of links. If you go to this policy reporter site, there's some presentations. If you go to the Kyverno site and the web page, if you go to policy reports, it goes through details on how this is in Kyverno. And then if you go to the workgroup policy repo, you will see the Kubebench adapter is also there right now. So let me just show that very quickly. And we're just kicking off some of the efforts on the other adapters, right? So if you go to policy report, Kubebench, this is a job which will spawn other jobs to run Kubebench and produce a policy report. So you can try that out as well. So yeah, lots of activity here and excited to kind of see some of these other adapters happening. And again, would welcome, more feedback, more contributions.
Thank you, Jim. That was very, very nice to see some real stuff, right? So it's not just talk here. And I think one of the things, like I mentioned, we are doing is to adopt this into the Open Cluster Management Community project so that we will actually have the multi-cluster view of this. So I think that I'm very excited about that as well. Are there any questions? I think we just about ran out of time.
Are there any questions for Jim and Jaya? If not, then thank you so much, Jim and Jaya, for presenting the policy white paper. That was very exciting. This is it. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.